There are some stories where trust is shattered in the most unexpected way, where the very people we rely on for safety become the ones to betray us. But sometimes, the truth hides in plain sight, and the camera catches it all. This is one of those stories. A prison guard, someone sworn to protect the inmates, does the unthinkable. What starts as a routine day behind bars turns into a nightmare for one inmate, and it's all captured on camera. By the time the truth comes to light, careers are destroyed, lives are ruined, and the justice system itself is left questioning everything it stands for. Welcome to Dark Justice Files. It's late afternoon at Grayson State Penitentiary. The air is thick with the smell of stale food, sweat, and the ever-present scent of iron. The high, barbed wire fences surround the facility, a constant reminder that the men inside are far from free. On this particular day, the prison's usual hum of activity fills the air, the sound of clanging metal doors, the muffled shuffling of inmates' shoes on concrete floors, and the disjointed chatter echoing down the long, dimly lit corridors. Inmates are returning to their cells after a brief, supervised hour of exercise in the yard. Guards are scattered across the compound, ensuring order is maintained, but among them is Officer Daniel King, a name that would soon be synonymous with scandal. Daniel King, 32, had worked at Grayson for nearly 8 years. He was known for being strict, sometimes even too harsh, but he had always been seen as a professional. He was a face that seemed trustworthy until everything changed. It all began with inmate James Foster, a man convicted of armed robbery and assault. Foster, in his mid-30s, had been incarcerated at Grayson for 6 years. His time behind bars had been uneventful, save for a few minor infractions that had kept him on the radar of the prison staff. But Foster was nothing if not patient. He had kept his head down, serving his time quietly. But there was one thing Foster didn't know, the one thing that would soon make him a target. Foster had begun to speak up about what was happening inside the prison. Slowly, he started documenting incidents of guard brutality, prisoner abuse, and corruption within the facility. Word had spread that he was becoming a whistleblower of sorts, and that had made him enemies among some of the more corrupt members of the staff. Officer Daniel King had been one of those men. King was no stranger to using force when it was called for. He had a reputation for pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable, even for a prison guard. It was known that he disliked Foster, but no one knew the full extent of his animosity. Then came the fateful day. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when the tension between King and Foster reached a boiling point. Foster had been in a minor altercation with another inmate, a routine scuffle that was quickly broken up by guards. But as Foster was being escorted to the disciplinary block, Daniel King, who had been watching the situation unfold from a distance, saw an opportunity. In a twisted move, King took matters into his own hands. Without any provocation, he grabbed Foster, slamming him against the wall of the narrow corridor. The sound of Foster's body hitting the concrete echoed down the hall, followed by the crack of a fist connecting with Foster's ribs. The sound of Foster's gasps for breath was drowned out by the heavy footsteps of King. But none of this was known to the higher-ups at the time. The assault would have remained unnoticed if not for one crucial detail. The security camera that had been installed just days before aimed directly down the corridor. Foster's screams were captured on film, but the camera didn't stop there. It recorded every brutal punch, every painful twist of Foster's body as he struggled to fight back. King was relentless, his anger pouring out with each blow. What was meant to be a simple reprimand turned into a violent attack that left Foster bruised and bloodied on the floor. For a moment, the hallway fell silent, only the soft hum of the security camera system breaking the stillness. Foster lay on the ground, clutching his side, barely able to breathe. King stood over him, panting heavily, his fists clenched. It wasn't long before the footage found its way into the hands of Detective Leah Simmons. Detective Simmons, a seasoned investigator, had been called in to look into a string of complaints from within the prison, rumors about an escalating culture of abuse. She had no idea that her investigation would soon uncover something so far beyond the ordinary misconduct of prison guards. The moment Simmons saw the footage, she knew this was no ordinary case. The footage wasn't just a glimpse into an isolated incident, it was proof of a pattern. She watched the footage again and again, noticing the deliberate way King had positioned himself in front of the cameras, making sure no one would intervene. The evidence was damning, but there was something that made Simmons uneasy. Foster had been left in the hallway, unconscious and bleeding. Why didn't anyone intervene? Why had the security camera footage been so conveniently timed, and why did the rest of the guards turn a blind eye? Simmons knew that she was looking at something bigger than a rogue guard. Something darker, something systemic. As Simmons dug deeper into King's past, she discovered a chilling connection, one that would change the direction of her investigation. 2 months before the attack on Foster, King had been involved in another controversial incident. At the time, it had been brushed off as an unfortunate misunderstanding. But now, with the new evidence, it appeared that King had been the central figure in yet another brutal attack, this time against another inmate, Carlos Rivera. The attack had been quieted with a swift cover-up, but Simmons began to realize this wasn't a case of one guard stepping over the line. This was a pattern of behavior that went unchecked for years. With the pressure mounting, Simmons requested a meeting with Foster. She needed to hear his side of the story. As Foster entered the interrogation room, he looked disheveled, his eyes still puffy from the beating. When he spoke, his voice was shaky, but there was a quiet defiance in his words. "He wanted to break me," Foster whispered. He knew I was speaking up, but he didn't know I had proof. Foster pulled out a small, battered notebook from his jumpsuit pocket. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, names of guards, dates of incidents, and detailed accounts of the abuse he had witnessed. It was a bombshell. Foster had been keeping his own record. But now the question was, would anyone listen? With the investigation snowballing and King's career teetering on the edge of ruin, the question remains, what will happen next? As Detective Simmons works tirelessly to expose the full scope of the corruption within Grayson State Penitentiary, she uncovers more shocking revelations that could change the course of the entire justice system. But King, now under investigation, has one last card to play, a final twist that could end the case before it even begins. Will Simmons be able to bring the truth to light, or will those in power bury it once again? The clock is ticking, and the fight for justice is far from over. In the heart of the investigation, a new twist emerges, one that could change everything. Detective Leah Simmons has uncovered more than she bargained for. The case against Officer Daniel King is unraveling, but what she didn't expect was the network of corruption surrounding him. As the walls close in on King, the darkness within Grayson State Penitentiary grows deeper. And the stakes? They've never been higher. After Foster's bombshell revelation and the damning footage of King's attack, Detective Simmons felt a rush of determination. But as she dug deeper, what began as a simple case of police brutality quickly morphed into a conspiracy far more sinister than she could have ever imagined. It didn't take long for Simmons to realize that King wasn't acting alone. She began to uncover a network of guards, some higher up the chain of command, who had been complicit in turning a blind eye to the abuse. The deeper Simmons went, the more disturbing the connections grew. It wasn't just a rogue officer. This was a systemic issue, one that had been festering for years. The prison walls seemed to hold more secrets than anyone could have anticipated. As Simmons dug into the backgrounds of other guards, she uncovered a chilling pattern. Guards who had been involved in previous violent incidents were either promoted or quietly reassigned. Corruption ran through the very veins of Grayson, and now, Simmons was determined to bring it to the surface, no matter what the cost. But the higher the stakes became, the more dangerous it got. Daniel King, though seemingly broken, was not going down without a fight. The investigation had already cost him everything: his job, his reputation, and his future. But King had one final card to play: his silence. He refused to speak to investigators without a lawyer, and every attempt to get him to cooperate was met with stonewalling. But it wasn't just his refusal to talk that made Simmons nervous. The more she pushed, the more it became clear that King wasn't the only person trying to cover his tracks. There were others in Grayson who were too involved to let the investigation succeed. Simmons couldn't ignore the mounting pressure. Someone was pulling strings behind the scenes to protect King, and it was only a matter of time before she found out who. She soon found herself staring at an even bigger mystery: Who was trying to shield King from justice? Who in the system was willing to risk everything to keep the truth from coming out? Late one night, Simmons received an anonymous tip. It was a grainy, black and white image of a man, someone she didn't recognize at first. He was in the prison's administration building, talking to King just hours before the attack on Foster. The man was high-ranking, possibly an official from outside the prison, someone who had the power to pull strings. Simmons couldn't shake the feeling that this man was key to the whole conspiracy. But the bigger question was, who was he, and why was he so interested in keeping King safe? As Simmons delved into the man's identity, she uncovered a name that sent a chill down her spine: Warren Hayes, a state senator with ties to the prison system. Hayes had been a vocal advocate for prison reform in the state, but Simmons found unsettling documents that linked him to shady dealings, including lucrative contracts with private prison companies. Simmons began to connect the dots. It wasn't just about a guard's brutality, it was about power, money, and a deep-rooted network that protected its own at all costs. The more she uncovered, the more the truth seemed to slip further from her grasp. By now, Detective Simmons was playing a dangerous game. She'd exposed one small piece of the puzzle, but the more she uncovered, the more it seemed like the entire system was working against her. The people she once trusted were now potential enemies, and she began to suspect that there was a mole within the investigation. Despite the mounting danger, Simmons pressed on. She scheduled a meeting with Warren Hayes, the mysterious state senator, in an attempt to confront him directly. Her plan was risky. There was no telling how deep Hayes' involvement went or how much power he wielded. But she had no choice. This was her last chance to crack the case wide open. Hayes agreed to meet her in his office under the pretense of discussing prison reform, but Simmons was certain there was more at play here. As she walked into the sleek, polished building where Hayes' office was located, a sense of unease crept over her. She could feel the eyes of unseen watchers, the sense that every move she made was being calculated. Inside, Hayes sat behind a large mahogany desk, a smug grin on his face as he welcomed her. But Simmons wasn't fooled by his charm. There was something lurking behind his eyes, something that told her this wasn't just a conversation about policy. "You're digging in places you shouldn't, Detective," Hayes said smoothly, his tone condescending. "You should be careful. People have been known to disappear in this line of work." Simmons narrowed her eyes. She was on the brink of uncovering the final pieces of this corrupt puzzle, but Hayes was right. She was walking into dangerous territory. She could feel it in her gut. Something was about to happen that would change everything. Before Simmons could respond, the door to Hayes' office slammed open, and a figure stepped inside, someone she wasn't expecting, Officer Daniel King. With a shock, Simmons realized the meeting wasn't what it seemed. King wasn't here to answer for his crimes. He was here on someone's orders. As Simmons stood there, heart pounding, she couldn't help but wonder, had she been lured into a trap? King smirked, his eyes cold, almost mocking. "You think you've got it all figured out, don't you, Detective? You think this is the truth? But you're not ready for the real story." Before Simmons could process what was happening, King motioned to someone behind her, and the door clicked shut. The room was now completely locked. What had Simmons walked into? Was she being used as a pawn in a much bigger game of power? As the investigation reaches its breaking point, Simmons is now fighting for her own survival. What secrets will she uncover next? And who in the prison system can she trust, if anyone? The walls are closing in, and Detective Leah Simmons is facing a deadly game of cat and mouse. As she uncovers more layers of corruption, the lines between friend and foe blur. Now, trapped in a locked office with Officer Daniel King and the influential state Senator Warren Hayes, the stakes have never been higher. But as the truth edges closer to the surface, a shocking betrayal threatens everything. The final pieces of the puzzle are within reach, but the question remains, will Simmons make it out alive to expose the truth? Locked in Warren Hayes' plush, intimidating office, Detective Simmons could feel the weight of the situation settle around her like a heavy fog. King stood by the door, his eyes filled with a smug satisfaction, while Hayes leaned back in his chair, the confidence in his demeanor unnerving. "You're in over your head, Detective," Hayes said with a cold smile. "You think you've been playing the game, but you've been played." Simmons took a deep breath, refusing to let fear take hold. She had come too far to back down now. She'd uncovered the connections between King, Hayes, and the deep corruption at Grayson State Penitentiary. But she wasn't prepared for the twist that Hayes had just thrown her way. King stepped closer, a menacing grin on his face. "You're not going to get the answers you're looking for, Simmons. This isn't about justice, it's about control. And you've just pissed off the wrong people." Simmons' mind raced. She had one shot to turn this around. "I'm not afraid of you, King. I've seen your brutality. I know what you've done. And it's over. You can't hide from the truth forever." But Hayes' laugh sent a chill down her spine. "The truth?" he scoffed. "What truth?" "The truth is, you've been out of your depth from the start. There are people far more powerful than you behind all of this. People who won't let you ruin everything just because you're playing detective." The tension in the room thickened as Simmons realized the gravity of the situation. Hayes wasn't just a politician, he was a puppet master, pulling strings far beyond Grayson. He had powerful allies, ones whose reach extended to the highest offices in the state. And Daniel King? He was just a small cog in a much bigger machine. Simmons had stumbled upon a criminal empire, a well-oiled network of corruption that spanned beyond the prison walls. She had always suspected something more sinister was at play, but now, standing here in Hayes' office, it was clear just how deep the rabbit hole went. Simmons knew she couldn't afford to stay in the office for long. She needed to get out, get to the evidence she had, and expose the network before they silenced her for good. But before she could make a move, Hayes' voice broke through the silence. "I think it's time you learned a lesson, Detective," Hayes said, his tone darkening. "You don't play with the people we protect." Just as Simmons started to plan her next move, the door burst open, and a new figure entered the room. Simmons' heart skipped a beat. Detective Mark Richards, her old partner. Simmons froze, her mind racing. Richards had been with her from the beginning of the investigation, helping her piece together the puzzle. But something about his presence now felt off. His face was unreadable, and there was a strange coldness in his eyes. "Richards?" Simmons whispered, confusion creeping into her voice. "What are you doing here?" Richards looked at her, his expression unreadable, before turning to Hayes. "I'm here to finish this." The words hit Simmons like a punch to the gut. Richards wasn't here to help her, he was part of the plan. He had been working with Hayes all along. Her mind raced to catch up. All those late nights when Richards had disappeared, all those moments when he seemed just a little too eager to let certain things go. He'd been playing both sides. He was in on it from the start. "No," Simmons whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You can't be part of this. You're my partner. You've always had my back." Richards stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun holster. "I had your back, Simmons. But you never understood what you were up against. Now, I'm here to make sure this ends before you bring the whole system crashing down on us." Hayes' laughter echoed in the room. "You see, Detective? The truth is messy. People get hurt when they dig too deep. And now, your old friend is going to make sure you stop digging." Simmons felt the world shift beneath her feet. She had trusted Richards, trusted him more than anyone. And now, the betrayal was like a slap to the face. She had no idea who she could trust anymore. As the realization of Richards' betrayal sank in, Simmons' mind was working overtime. She had to act fast. She knew she couldn't take on both King and Richards in this office. But there was one thing they didn't expect. Simmons had a secret weapon, the recording. Earlier in the investigation, she had planted a small, hidden camera in her jacket when she met with Hayes, knowing that she might be walking into a trap. She hadn't expected it to be this serious, but now, the footage could be her only chance to expose the truth. Simmons subtly pressed the button on her recorder, hoping to capture whatever happened next. It was her last move. With a glance toward the door, Simmons made her decision. She needed to get out of the office. She had to reach the elevator, get to the underground parking garage, and find safety. She had the evidence. She just had to survive long enough to get it out. But as she stood up, King moved quickly, grabbing her by the arm. "Where do you think you're going, Detective?" he hissed. Simmons' heart pounded in her chest as she fought to free herself. The room felt like it was closing in, and the sense of danger was palpable. But just as she thought she had a chance to break free, Hayes stood up, a menacing smile on his face. "You're not going anywhere, Simmons. Not until we're done with you." Suddenly, the office lights flickered, plunging the room into semi-darkness. Simmons, fueled by adrenaline, pushed Richards aside, her heart racing as she darted for the door. But before she could escape, the lights snapped back on, and there, standing in the doorway, was another figure. It was Detective Simmons' boss, Captain Samuel Jacobs, the man who had assigned her to the Grayson case. But his eyes? They were cold, his face expressionless. And in his hand, he held an envelope, sealed and marked with a single word, "Confidential." "Detective," Jacobs said, his voice low and deliberate, "we need to talk." Simmons froze. She had no idea who was on her side anymore. And then, Jacobs stepped forward, handing her the envelope. "This was always bigger than you thought." What was inside the envelope? Was Jacobs part of the conspiracy? Or was he just another victim of a system too corrupt to fight? And with everyone around her seemingly out to stop her, can Simmons expose the truth before they silence her forever? The clock is ticking, and the final revelation may be just around the corner. Detective Leah Simmons is caught in a web of deception. Her boss, Captain Samuel Jacobs, has just handed her an envelope marked "Confidential." With every step she takes in this case, the line between friend and foe blurs further. But the real question remains, is Jacobs part of the conspiracy, or is he the last ally she has left? As Simmons dives deeper into the shadows, a chilling new threat emerges, one that could destroy everything she's worked for. The truth is close, but it may cost her life. Simmons held the envelope in her trembling hands. The air in the office was thick with tension, and her heart raced with dread. What could be inside? Was this Jacobs' way of warning her? Or had he finally chosen to side with the corrupt system she had been fighting for so long? Jacobs' eyes remained cold, unreadable, but there was something in his posture that made Simmons wary. He stood across from her, his arms crossed, his gaze steady. "Open it, Simmons," he said, his voice surprisingly soft, yet heavy with meaning. The sound of the envelope tearing open felt louder than it should have in the silence that hung between them. Simmons pulled out a single sheet of paper, folded carefully. As she unfolded it, the words on the page made her stomach turn. It was a list, names, dates, and locations of high-level meetings between state officials and the private prison companies. But what stood out were the notes written at the bottom. "King is our man. Cover up the Foster incident. He knows too much." Simmons' blood ran cold. These weren't just names of corrupt officers. They were the very people she had been investigating. And at the top of the list? The name Warren Hayes. But there was more, much more. Her eyes scanned the document, but one name caught her attention above all the others. Captain Samuel Jacobs. Her own boss. The revelation hit Simmons like a physical blow. Captain Jacobs had been involved in this web of corruption from the start. He wasn't just a bystander. He was in on it. Simmons' mind raced. How had she not seen this before? The subtle hints, the way Jacobs had acted when the investigation began. He had been too calm, too controlled. But now, with the evidence in her hands, it was undeniable. He had been a part of the conspiracy all along. Her stomach twisted with disgust. She had trusted Jacobs. He had been the one who assigned her to the Grayson case. He had promised her that they would expose the corruption and bring those responsible to justice. But the truth was much darker. Jacobs was as guilty as Hayes, King, and the rest of them. But Simmons wasn't going to give up. She couldn't. She had come too far to let them win. She had to expose the truth. Jacobs watched her closely, his expression unwavering. "I knew you would find it eventually," he said, his tone colder than before. "You're a good detective, Simmons. But this game is bigger than you. Bigger than all of us." Simmons looked up from the paper, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "So, what now, Jacobs? What happens to me?" Jacobs didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced toward the door, as if waiting for something or someone. Simmons followed his gaze, a knot tightening in her chest. And then, just as the room seemed to close in on her, she heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside the office door. The door swung open, and two figures stepped into the room. Simmons didn't need to see their faces to know who they were. The first was Officer Daniel King, the man who had attacked Foster and set this entire investigation into motion. The second was Detective Mark Richards, her old partner, now clearly an enemy. King's smirk was sickening, and Richards' eyes were filled with a coldness Simmons had never seen before. The man she had trusted, her partner, her friend, had been playing her from the start. "You think you're going to take us down, Simmons?" King's voice dripped with malice. "You're out of your league. You were never meant to win this." Richards didn't speak, but his icy stare told Simmons everything she needed to know. He was in on this from the beginning. The investigation, the late nights, the shared coffee breaks, they had all been part of the plan to get her to dig herself deeper. Simmons' mind reeled. She had thought she was the one pulling the strings. But now, she realized she had been a pawn all along. And the worst part? They were going to make sure she didn't leave this room alive. Simmons took a step back, her hand instinctively reaching for her gun. But she knew it was futile. With King and Richards in the room, she was outnumbered. And Jacobs? He hadn't moved an inch. His allegiance was clear. He was with them. "Don't try to fight us, Simmons," King warned, stepping closer. "It's over. You've crossed the line, and now you're going to pay the price." Simmons' eyes flicked to the envelope in her hand. She still had the evidence. She couldn't let them take it from her. She couldn't let them bury the truth. But just as she was about to make her move, a new voice interrupted the tense standoff. "Not so fast." Simmons turned toward the door, and there, standing in the doorway, was Detective Leah Simmons' mentor, Captain Tom Harris. Harris had been the man who had mentored her through the academy, the one she had looked up to throughout her career. But as he stepped into the room, there was something in his eyes, a coldness, a distance, that sent a chill down her spine. "Captain Harris," Simmons said, her voice shaking. "What are you doing here?" Harris stepped further into the room, his gaze never leaving Simmons. "You've been causing a lot of trouble, Simmons," he said, his voice low. "You should have left this case alone. Now I'm here to clean up your mess." Simmons stood frozen in shock. Another betrayal? Harris had been the one man she thought she could trust. But now, standing there in front of her, he was no different than Jacobs, King, or Richards. And as Harris raised his hand, signaling for King and Richards to step back, Simmons realized she was trapped. Every escape route had closed. Every ally had turned. "What happens now?" Simmons whispered, her heart pounding. Harris didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a step forward, his hand still raised. "Now, we finish this." Just as he moved to grab the envelope from her hand, the lights flickered once again, and this time, the sound of a gunshot rang out. The room went black. Was the shot meant for Simmons? Who fired it, and what does it mean for the future of the investigation? Everything is about to change, but in what direction? The darkness that followed the gunshot felt endless. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, and everything around Detective Leah Simmons blurred into a chaotic mess of uncertainty. But as the smoke began to clear, one question echoed in her mind. Who fired the shot, and why? The game had changed. The stakes had never been higher. Now, with the truth at her fingertips, Simmons must fight like never before to expose the corruption that has tainted the very justice system she swore to protect. But will she survive long enough to see it through? The room was silent, and Simmons could feel her heart pounding in her chest as her eyes adjusted to the dim light. The gunshot had been deafening, and she was unsure of where the shot had come from. Was it meant for her? Was it one of the men in the room? She felt the presence of Captain Tom Harris looming over her as she slowly regained her senses. The gunshot had caused chaos, but now the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. As her vision cleared, Simmons saw Captain Harris standing still, his expression unreadable. But what shocked her most wasn't the look on his face. It was the blood that was slowly staining his shirt, dripping down from a wound on his shoulder. The shot hadn't been aimed at her. It had been aimed at him. Behind Harris stood a familiar figure, Detective Mark Richards, holding a smoking gun. His face was a mask of confusion and guilt, but Simmons could see the conflict in his eyes. "Mark." Simmons whispered, stepping forward cautiously. "What did you do?" Richard's voice was strained, but there was a clarity to his words. "It wasn't supposed to be this way, Simmons. But I couldn't let him destroy you. He was going to kill you. He's been running the show all along." Simmons glanced at Harris, who was clutching his shoulder, the shock still evident on his face. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Harris, the mentor she had trusted, the man who had guided her throughout her career, had been the mastermind behind it all. Harris staggered backward, his eyes narrowing at Richards. "You're making a mistake, Richards," he spat, his voice low and dangerous. "You're not going to get away with this. You don't know what you've just done." Richards took a step back, keeping his gun aimed at Harris. "I know exactly what I've done. You were the one pulling the strings, Captain. You thought you could use us, control us. But I won't let you take her down. Not after everything you've done." Simmons stood still, processing the shock of it all. Harris had been at the center of the entire web of corruption. He had manipulated everyone, her, Richards, and even Captain Jacobs. He was the one who had been behind the cover-ups, behind the prison brutality, behind the abuse of power. As she watched the two men, Simmons realized the truth had come at a cost. Richards had made a dangerous choice, but it was a choice that had to be made. Harris had to be stopped. With the sound of sirens growing closer outside, Simmons knew that this was her moment. The evidence she had, the footage, the list, it all came together. The truth was ready to be exposed. The people who had been pulling the strings were about to be held accountable. The next few hours were a whirlwind. Richards had called for backup, and within minutes, the entire building was swarming with police officers. Harris was arrested and taken away, his face twisted in disbelief and rage. The full extent of his involvement in the corruption was now laid bare for all to see. Simmons stood outside the building, the weight of the case finally lifting off her shoulders. The truth had come to light, and the justice system had been shaken to its core. But there was a bittersweet feeling in her chest. She had lost so much: her partner, her mentor, her trust in the very system she had fought to protect. But in the end, justice had won. The corrupt guards were arrested, the false narratives shattered, and the victims of Grayson State Penitentiary would finally see the justice they deserved. Simmons looked up at the sky, the first rays of dawn breaking through the clouds. It was a new day, a new beginning, and she had earned it. The case had come to a close, but for Detective Leah Simmons, the fight for justice would never end. The road ahead was uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure: she would never stop searching for the truth. If you've been following this journey with us, thank you. Your support means everything. But the story doesn't stop here. There are more dark truths out there waiting to be uncovered, and more justice to be served. Make sure to subscribe to Dark Justice Files and stay tuned for the next chilling chapter. Because when the truth is hidden in the shadows, it's our job to bring it into the light. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Until next time, stay vigilant. Stay in the light.